This is the DiscoveryOpt LHT, their lightest and most affordable crossover scope. This 3 to 12 power optic really hits that sweet spot for hunters while having a tactical first focal plane reticle and exposed turrets for target shooters. So, is this budget optic worth it? Let's find out. Let's skip the boring unboxing videos and just take a look at what you get inside the box. This is the DiscoveryOpt LHT. It is a 3 to 12 power scope with a first focal plane reticle and a 42mm objective lens, so a relatively compact scope. I mean, more of the traditional profile of a hunting or long-range scope rather than the grossly oversized ELR-inspired scopes that are becoming very common nowadays. Now, the LHT is part of their entry-level line, and it's entry-level priced. There are some features that are cost-saving. For example, it has a visible seam here, and I suppose that allows them to use basically the same lower or back half of their scope for a number of their different scopes and just swap out a different front for different objective sizes as well as reticles. And it is an illuminated reticle, by the way, and it has the illuminator rheostat on sharing the same turret as our parallax focus. There are 6 levels of illumination powered by a 2032 coin battery, and there's an off in between. And our parallax focus turns smoothly, and it goes all the way down to 8 yards, which is unusually close. So that makes this a good scope option for air guns. And our relatively compact turrets are locking, so you pull up to unlock, and that is very audible. Tactile positive with no slop in between the clicks, and each of the clicks is a quarter MOA on both turrets, and they are user resettable. You can just use a coin or a flathead tool, unscrew that top there, pop off your turret, reset the 0, and let's take a listen at our windage. Also quite audible. Tactile positive with no slop in between each of the clicks, and that is also lockable. Let's take a look at our magnification ring. Turns relatively smoothly. A little bit of, I can feel the gears at the lower end. It has a little bit of a fin, or sort of a semi-pin, to help with the leverage. And our diopter turns smoothly. So overall, this is their entry-level scope, but apart from the seam, it doesn't really look unusual. It certainly doesn't look like a cheap budget scope. But the important thing is, how does it look through the glass? So we're going to get this mounted up. It has a 30mm tube here, and we're going to get this put on and take a look through the glass next. Before we get started with the test, I'd just like to take a quick break here to talk about this episode's sponsor, Aura. For the cost of just a VPN, I'm getting a whole suite of security services, including $1 million in identity theft insurance, and they're even removing me from those damn data broker listings. Use my link, aura.com/moondog, and you can try them for 14 days, free. And if you use that link, you're helping to support this channel. You know, identity fraud is a real thing, and with AI, it's all too easy to spoof your identity. That's why you should try out Aura. All right, let's get back to the tests. We are looking through the DiscoveryOpt LHT at the peak of Mount Davidson, approximately 1,400 to 1,500 yards away, with the scope set at its lowest power of 3 to give our best overall image through the glass. And you can compare the color and the brightness of the sky inside of the glass to that outside of the glass to get a sense of what, if any, color and brightness shifting is occurring. Now, I see a little bit of softening around the outer edge, a little bit of distortion, so it's not equally sharp from center all the way out to the outer edge, but the overall eye box is pretty good, and there's a fairly decent exit pupil. I can see image practically all the way out to the edge of the tube. Now, as we bring up our magnification to halfway in its magnification range, or thereabouts, about 8 power, which is typically a scope sweet spot at the halfway point, the overall image I'm seeing is still pretty good. I see fairly minimal chromatic aberration at the outer edges of the scope image. Now let's bring up our magnification all the way up to its maximum of 12. I can clearly make out the trail marker sign at the top of the hill there to the right and above the center of the crosshairs. That is about a 3-foot-ish steel sign on top of a pole, which is a good proxy for an IPSC target at this distance. All right, let's take a look at the illumination, and this is a pretty thin reticle, so you're probably not going to see much because it requires a thick reticle to have more reflectivity. But this is twilight bright, not daylight bright on the illumination, and this is at its highest intensity. I'm going to put my hand over the bell here so you can see that the reticle is illuminated, the entire line of the stadia, but some key points in the elevation are exceptionally brighter than the rest of the stadia lines. We're looking at our reference targets downrange at 100 yards, and we have the scope set at its lowest power of 3 for our best overall view through the glass. And this is a good opportunity to check our range of adjustments, starting with our elevation. Okay, that's very top. No dead clicks. And that is the very bottom. All right, let's dial this back to factory 0. There we go. And now let's check our windage. All right, that's the right extent. And that is the left extent of that. Alright, let's get this back to its factory 0 on the turret. Alright, now let's bring up our magnification about halfway in its range to its typical sweet spot. We're going to stop at 8 power. Take a look at those reference targets. Now let's bring this all the way up to its maximum of 12 power. And we do see a little bit of chromatic aberration around the outer edges. It's not too bad, but to be expected with this budget-tier scope. And the chromatic aberration you're seeing in the footage is usually more pronounced than certainly I'm seeing with the naked eye. Now we are roughly lined up to the bottom left highlight on that grid target, so let's do a box test. I'm going to turn our elevation full rotation, and now I'm going to turn our windage a full rotation. Now I'm going to turn our elevation back, and I'm going to turn our windage back, and we're right back where we started. Alright, let's give these turrets a little more of a torture test. This is the nipple twister test coined by my buddy Cyclops Joe, and we're just going to turn the heck out of these turrets for a good 20-30 seconds. See if they will come back to their original factory 0. Alright, let's dial our elevation back first to 0, and now our windage back to 0. So it looks like we're about an MOA off from our original starting position, so it didn't pass the nipple twister test, but then again, for a $130-ish budget scope, it's not all that surprising. Given that it didn't quite pass the nipple twister test, I wanted to see if it would hold 0 on my through-weight bolt-action rifle. I shot through half a box of 147 grain Winchester white box full metal jacket, and I stayed on target at 100 yards. And on the paper target on the bottom left, I can see the reactive sticker in the center of that target, as well as 2 hits on the reactive sticker, but I don't see any additional holes on paper. And on our optical resolution chart on the bottom right, I can make out both horizontal and vertical lines down to only about element 4 in group -2, which for a 12 power scope is only okay, but for a budget tier scope like this one, actually not bad. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the video, and don't forget to hit that like button and the subscribe button and notification bell buttons if you haven't already. It just takes a second, it's absolutely free, so I appreciate you taking a moment to press those buttons before this video ends. And I'd also like to thank Discovery Optics for sending out the LHT for me to test. Now, the TLDR on the LHT is that this is a surprisingly good scope for a budget scope. And by budget, I just checked Amazon right now and it's going for less than 130 bucks. So yeah. Now, to get it to that price tier, you obviously are going to make some compromises, and they're most notable in the optics here. There are sharper 12-power scopes out there for more money, and it's not tack sharp from center to the outer edge. There is some softening, some curvature distortion around the outer edge, especially noticeable when you're moving your head around the eye box. But this actually has a pretty decent eye box and a pretty good eye relief for a budget scope. Because for that price, you're typically looking at a basic 3 to 9 deer hunting scope, which has far fewer features, like it would have a fixed focus. This has a first focal plane MOA reticle, and it has a parallax focus that adjusts down to 8 yards, which means you can aim at targets 8 yards away, which makes this a very usable scope for rimfire or for air guns. This scope has a lot of versatility, and that's surprising for a scope in a $130 price range. But maybe you're in the school of thought that, yeah, you really still haven't found a decent scope under $200, $250. You really should save up your money. Let me know in the comments where you fall in that school of thought. But if you are interested in picking up the LHT, you can find more information in my full written review at moondogindustries.com, and you can find a link to that article in this video's description. So thanks for taking a moment to read that article, and thanks for taking the time to watch this video. God bless. Moondog out. Hey, I'd like to know what you thought of this video. Leave me a comment or chat with me on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, MeWe, Instagram, or Locals. And if you want to see all of my videos, go to moondogindustries.com.